Take 5. Yes, I've tried to do this video 5 times now, and crap keeps happening, and I keep having to do it over. So, let's start again. This, as the title says, is my review for UFC 94, the big GSP versus BJ Penn card. I will be honest, I didn't do a preview for this, as most people saw, if you saw my last video and my rant against TNA. Though, I will be honest, I was not enamored with this card. I will go on with some of my thoughts I was going to have on this card, because they're still a bit relevant. But, I was not enamored with this card, to be honest. I thought there was 2 fights on here that I wanted to see, and the Machida fight, I just was kind of wondering about the outcome. But, so there was nothing really on this card that really had my attention, other than, you know, GSP versus BJ Penn, and some people would say that was worthy enough within itself to order it. I wasn't really convinced, as, you know, just, I had problems with the match, just me being my overly critical self had problems with the match, before they even did it, so, but I will get into that, and I'm sure people will get angry and disagree with me, but that's fine. We all have our opinions. But, I will say this, I have not seen the undercard. Hopefully we get to see all of the undercard, and particularly the John Fitch fight, which apparently his opponent had an amazing entrance, maybe the best entrance in the history of MMA, or not MMA, but UFC. I shouldn't say MMA, because I very seriously doubt that. There have been some crazy entrances in MMA. But in UFC. And I would love to see it, because I think that's something the UFC needs more of, is really good entrances. As if you watched a few of my MMA vids, you know I was a big Pride fan. One of the reasons was because the entrances were a bit more elaborate. There was a little bit more of an entertainment element to it. I liked that. I know not everybody does. I know everybody says there's no place for that in MMA, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. I think this worked, and apparently it worked for the live crowd too, so there you go. But to get on with the main card, which was very, very interesting, this was the night of decisions. The night of decisions, and the first, and I will, as the complete undercard, all went to decisions, and so did most of this, of the main card as well, the pay-per-view card, which is pretty surprising. I'm not too sure of any time that's ever happened in MMA. But anyways, we'll get going here. We had Guida versus Diaz. I'm a big Nate Diaz fan, and so I was very much looking forward to this fight. And even as me, as a big Diaz fan, I can freely say that this was probably the match of the night. Very entertaining. Went to a split decision. I would love to see these guys fight again. I don't know if UFC will do that. They don't usually, you know, give guys who had split decisions rematches, but I think this would be a good thing. I wish they would do more than that. Do more of that, particularly with undercard guys, because I think it gives undercard guys a thing to do, particularly when they're not going for titles. And it gives you rivalries, even on the undercards, which I think is a good thing and helps build up some undercard matches. And even if, you know, even if it's not a good fight, and you give guys, you know, who went to a split decision, you can always put them on the undercard and not put them on TV, such as the go to one, by the way, which the crowd there loved. They were very much for him, overly for him. They weren't really against Diaz, which you would think maybe if they would be, but and apparently at the weigh-in the day before, they were very much against Diaz. But the one thing that, which by the way, that was apparently the biggest attendance ever for a UFC weigh-in. So they actually had to turn people away, according to reports. So that's a pretty big freaking deal. Next we had Parisyan. I know I didn't say that right. Versus Kim. I enjoyed the first 2 rounds of this fight, and then the second round was just downright boring, as neither guy looked really like they wanted to win. You know, I'm a big guy on throws and slams, so I enjoyed a lot of this because both guys are judo guys. So I enjoyed a lot of this, probably more than a lot of other people did. But I enjoy that sort of thing. Pretty good fight, in my opinion, up until the last round, where it just seemed like both guys were just going for the decision, which I didn't think either guy should have gone for the decision. But we had another split decision. Again, I think you could have these guys fight again. on an undercard somewhere, and it would be fine, and maybe you could get, you know, a rivalry going between those guys as well. Just saying, just throwing that out there. Some people might say, who wants to see that? And that's a very good point. Next we had Jon Jones versus Stephan Bonnar. This I loved. This was probably my favorite fight of the night, only because Jones was slamming Bonnar all over the place, and I love that sort of thing. I grew up, my dad, when I was much younger, would always, during the Olympics, would always watch freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling, and being a pro wrestling fan as well, I do like seeing guys get slammed around. I was always a huge, and I still am, a huge Dan Severn fan. I think Dan Severn is a very underrated guy when it comes to the history of MMA, and maybe one day I will do a big long rant on that. But so I enjoy things like this. I enjoy watching guys get suplexed and slammed and taken down in more conventional means. So I enjoyed this quite a bit, and Jones won by decision again, and then finally we got a knockout by Machida of all people. And to the Dirty White Boys' credit, who I was on Skype talking to while this card was going on, we were talking, and I think it was before the Jones fight. He goes, if this keeps going like this, Machida's going to win by knockout, because it's just the way it's going to be. And in this weird Twilight Zone night, Machida won by knockout in the first round, and it was not just a knockout; it was like a highlight reel knockout. I mean, he basically got either a trip or a sweep. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was a trip or a sweep, and then jumped on the guy, and then jumped on him, and jumped on Bonnar, and hit him good. I mean, he knocked him the fuck out, and then went to go hit him again, got pulled off. It was the end of the round. It was just insane. Then we got the main event, and so Machida didn't just get a knockout, but he got knockout of the night too. Somebody probably, I wonder if anyone betted on that. I'm sure you could have bet on who would get knockout of the night, and I'm sure you could probably bet on how that fight would end. If somebody took that, I am sure they took a crap load of money home with them, because Jesus, who would have thought that? Then we got GSP versus BJ Penn. A fairly boring fight, only because GSP completely dominated BJ Penn. And I mean completely. He looked like he was on another level than BJ Penn, and just destroyed Penn. And like I said, the two main fights, the Machida and the Penn fight, and the main event. I wanted Machida to win his fight only because I wanted to see what the UFC would do. And apparently they are going to give him a title shot, which I think is good, because I think he does deserve a title shot. And you know, and I know a lot of fans are like, oh, but if he wins, so what if he wins? It's better for the sport, because you're basically saying, unlike in boxing, where guys who are boring fighters but are good, you can be good and not be necessarily entertaining because you're a technically good fighter. And given that fact, a guy shouldn't, even though there is an entertainment aspect to this, I understand that, there's also a sport aspect to it. And particularly when you're talking about in the ring. And if a guy deserves a title shot, he deserves a title shot. And if he wins, he wins. And I think there's enough, I think there's enough guys at light heavyweight who could carry him as far as drawability goes. Where he could kind of piggyback even though he was the champion. You know, I definitely could see that. So I definitely wanted to see him win simply for that reason. I wanted to see Penn win as well, only because I wanted to see the disaster that would happen if he won, because he would basically hold two belts, one belt which he probably would not have, we would come up and probably would not have defended for over a year by the time he would have defended it, which I think is a complete joke. And was why I wasn't a big fan of this fight, because I think that UFC owed it to the lightweights to at least have an interim champion. I can't speak for some weird reason. Champion. While all this was going on, because even after this fight, I do not see Penn coming back before May. I would imagine he'll probably be back in July, maybe not till August. He took a pretty good beating would have to wait and see, of course. But you know, I could see him being out that long, and you know, that's a long time to be out and not defend your title. And I think that the lightweight division deserves a little better than that. I really do. I think that while a lot of people haven't called out UFC on this, and the few people I have seen have pretty much gotten knocked down because people are saying they're being overly critical, and we're going to see this great fight, and we did, and it wasn't a great fight, but we were going to see this fight that everyone wanted to see, and box office and money-wise, this was the right fight to put on. I have no problem with that, but I think you did kind of leave the lightweight division out in the cold while all this was going on. So, you know, that's just kind of my thought on it. But, you know, GSP dominated to the point that this was a pretty boring fight. That's one thing about MMA, and if you compare MMA and boxing, usually if you have a very dominant fight, it's not always boring. It can be boring, but it's not always boring. Pretty much, if you have a dominant fight in MMA, it does tend to get a bit boring. You only want to see a guy get, you know, mounted and beat the crap out of, and you know, and just not be able to do anything against the guy for so long before he gets fairly boring. But that is that. And so ends probably, you know, and you know, UFC thought this would do a pretty good buy rate. I'm not going to argue with them. They've been right on the you know, they were right on Couture Lesnar. They were right on the Ultimate on how much that did. So, and they thought this would do more, and it might have done more. And if it did more, good to them, because I don't see the next few shows doing that until we get to Lesnar and Mir, which honestly they could put on a bunch of filler on the undercard, even of the pay-per-view, and I think that it would still probably draw 1 million. As I think people really want to see Lesnar and Mir. I think it's been built up well, not just by UFC, but also for the fact that people just want to see it in people's minds. I think they themselves have built it up pretty well. So, that is all. An okay night of fights, I would say. Not the best, but we got a lot of decisions, and some of the final rounds on some of this stuff wasn't the most exciting thing in the world. But we get to see a Machida knockout, which, I mean, that's something. And we'll definitely, and I would say this is definitely a newsworthy show, because we'll definitely see Machida apparently taking on, going for the light heavyweight title at some point, hopefully sooner than later, I would hope. And GSP pretty much destroyed BJ Penn, which is news in of itself, and I would imagine we're going to start hearing the Anderson-Silva talks pretty soon. I would think, as that would be a pretty good fight and would probably be a pay-per-view that would draw very well, even though, you know, Silva is not the biggest draw. I don't know how many of you probably know that. I'm sure most of you would know that. He's not the biggest draw in the world on pay-per-view, probably just for the same reason that Roy Jones Jr. wasn't the biggest draw on pay-per-view, because he just dominated everybody, and who really wants to pay to see that? But, you know, but anyways, I would imagine that's where we're going to go. But overall, it was an okay night of fights. If I had ordered it, I probably wouldn't be too upset about it, simply because I don't think you can be too upset, because I think they, like I said, it wasn't anything that I was overly excited about, but I could see people getting excited about this, and I think that that's what you ask for, is a card that you get excited about. But there's not a lot of UFC cards, I'll be honest, that really get me excited about things, but that's just me. That is all. I am out. I will be back tomorrow, and later.